The Brabant Killers, 1982 to 1985, Belgium. Most serial killers have a motive you can eventually understand, even if you can't forgive it. Greed, rage, obsession. Something broken in the psychology that, once examined, at least makes a terrible kind of sense. What makes the Brabant Killers different? What makes them one of the most disturbing criminal cases in modern European history is that their motive to this day makes no sense at all. They robbed supermarkets and restaurants. They stole cash, food, sometimes nothing of apparent value, and they killed. They killed with a ferocity that was grotesquely disproportionate to anything they ever took. They shot people in parking lots, in aisles, in cars, at cash registers. They killed men, women, elderly shoppers, a little girl. 28 people died across 3 years of raids in the Belgian province of Brabant. The total value of everything stolen across all their attacks combined was less than what a moderately successful bank robber might take in a single job. This was not about the money. Everyone who has ever studied this case knows that. But if it wasn't about the money, then what was it about? Belgium has never found an answer, and Belgium has been asking for over 40 years. To understand what happened, you have to understand Belgium in the early 1980s. The country was politically fractured. Tensions between the Flemish North and the Francophone South ran deep. Far-right movements were gaining ground across Western Europe. The Cold War cast long shadows over institutions, military, police, intelligence services. Belgium was home to NATO headquarters. It was a country where, beneath the surface of ordinary civic life, multiple competing power structures quietly existed. All of this matters, because it becomes relevant later, when people start asking not just who the killers were, but who, if anyone, was protecting them. The attacks began in 1982, but the first phase was almost tentative by comparison with what came later. September 1982, a gang strikes a supermarket in Maubeuge, just across the French border. The raid is violent. Staff and customers are threatened at gunpoint, but no one is killed. Belgian investigators note the method: multiple attackers, heavily armed, military-style coordination, extreme aggression deployed without apparent necessity. They file the report. They don't yet know what they're looking at. Over the following months, similar raids occur at supermarkets and Delhaize grocery stores across Brabant province. The gang favors large retail chains, strikes in the evening when cash registers are full, and operates with a discipline that suggests prior military or paramilitary training. They use shotguns and automatic weapons. They move quickly. They terrify everyone in their path. But in this first phase, the body count, while real, is not yet catastrophic. Then, in the summer of 1983, everything accelerates. September 30th, 1983, the gang strikes a Delhaize supermarket in Over-Eg. This time, they don't just threaten, they shoot. 2 people are killed, several more wounded. The violence is sudden, explosive, almost gratuitous. Witnesses describe the shooters as operating with cold efficiency, showing no hesitation and no visible emotional response to the people falling in front of them. They take the cash and they leave. Police across Brabant province are now on high alert. The pressure to identify this group is enormous, but the gang leaves almost nothing behind. Shell casings, yes, and forensic analysis will eventually link the weapons used in multiple attacks to the same firearms, but no fingerprints, no clear surveillance footage good enough to produce identifications, no informants. Whoever these people are, they know how to disappear. 1984 brings more raids, more violence, more dead. The gang strikes at Braine-l'Alleud, at Uekel, at Nivelles. They hit the same chain, Delhaize, repeatedly, with enough consistency that investigators begin to wonder if this specificity means something. Is it ideological? Is someone targeting a particular corporation? Or is it simply that Delhaize stores, numerous and well-stocked, are operationally convenient targets? The investigation is hampered almost immediately by a problem that will plague it for decades. The Belgian police in the early 1980s are not a unified force. The gendarmerie and the judicial police are separate institutions with genuine institutional rivalry, poor communication structures, and competing jurisdictions. Information gathered by one branch is not always shared with the other. Evidence sits in different filing systems in different cities. The gang seems to move through this fragmentation like water through cracks, surfacing, striking, vanishing before any coordinated response can close around them, and then comes 1985. The year that turns this from a serious crime story into something that still makes Belgian citizens lower their voices when they talk about it. September 27, 1985, a Friday evening in Aalst, East Flanders. The Delhaize supermarket on Morsel Road is busy with end-of-week shoppers, families picking up groceries, elderly customers doing their weekly shop, children trailing behind their parents. At approximately 8 p.m., a group of men enters the store. What follows is not a robbery. It is a massacre. The attackers move through the store firing indiscriminately. They shoot a security guard. They shoot customers in the aisles. They shoot a woman in the parking lot as she tries to flee. A 3-year-old girl named Nathalie is killed. Her parents, both shot, survive barely. By the time the attackers leave, 8 people are dead, and several more are critically wounded. The total cash taken from the store is approximately 8,000 Belgian francs, the equivalent of roughly 200 euros in modern value. 200 euros. 8 lives. The country is in shock. Not the abstract civic shock of reading about something terrible, but genuine, personal, visceral fear. Because the Delhaize attacks have made it clear that nowhere is safe. Not a supermarket on a Friday evening. Not a parking lot. Not standing in line at a cash register. These men will shoot anyone, at any time, for no apparent reason proportionate to the horror they deliver. 2 weeks later, on November 9, 1985, the gang strikes again in Nivelles, another Delhaize. 3 more people are killed, including a man who simply happened to be in the parking lot at the wrong moment. Then, just days later, on November 14th, yet another attack at a restaurant in Ohain. More wounded, more dead, and then, as suddenly as it escalated, it stops. After November 1985, the Brabant Killers simply cease operations. No final raid, no confrontation with police, no dramatic arrest. They walk back into whatever shadows they came from, and they don't come back. 28 people are dead across 16 major incidents spanning 3 years. And Belgium is left standing in the wreckage with no suspects in custody and no clear understanding of what it just survived. The investigation that follows is by any measure one of the most exhaustive in Belgian criminal history, and also one of the most troubled. In the immediate aftermath, investigators focus on witness accounts. The attackers are consistently described across multiple incidents. One man, frequently referred to as the Giant, is described as enormously tall, over 2 meters, heavily built, and operating with particular ferocity. A second figure, the Killer, is described as lean, fast, precise. A third, the Old Man, appears older than the others and serves some kind of coordinating role. These descriptions are consistent enough across different witnesses at different crime scenes to suggest genuine reliability. But they are not enough to make an arrest. The firearms evidence is compelling. Ballistic analysis links a specific shotgun used in the attacks to multiple incidents, the same weapon appearing at crime scenes years apart, confirming these are not copycat attacks but a single coordinated group. This weapon, investigators eventually determine, is a Franchi Law 12, a semi-automatic shotgun favored by law enforcement and military units. The fact that the gang has access to this kind of weapon, combined with their tactical discipline and apparent training, drives investigators toward an uncomfortable conclusion. These are not ordinary criminals. In the late 1980s and early 1990s, a theory begins to circulate, quietly at first, then louder, that connects the Brabant Killers to a secret NATO-linked paramilitary network known as Operation Gladio. Gladio was a real program confirmed by Italian Prime Minister Giulio Andreotti in 1990. A network of hidden stay-behind cells established across Western Europe after World War II, designed to conduct resistance and destabilization operations in the event of a Soviet invasion. These cells had weapons caches, were trained in guerrilla tactics and psychological operations, and operated outside the normal command structures of their respective national governments. The theory, advanced most seriously by Belgian investigators and parliamentarians, is this. The Brabant attacks were not conducted for money. They were conducted to create fear, to destabilize Belgian society, to demonstrate the weakness of the state, and potentially to push the country toward a more authoritarian political posture in the context of Cold War anxiety. The specific targeting of ordinary domestic life, supermarkets, families shopping for groceries, was itself the message. Nowhere is safe. Your government cannot protect you. This theory explains several things that purely criminal motives cannot. The disproportionate violence, the small amounts stolen, the military-grade discipline, the complete absence of any criminal bragging or pattern that might lead to informants, and most critically, the abrupt cessation of the attacks after 1985, which coincides with a period of significant internal disruption within Belgian Gladio networks following increased scrutiny of far-right paramilitary activity. It also explains one of the most disturbing threads in the entire investigation. The repeated allegation made by multiple investigators over multiple decades that evidence in the Brabant case was deliberately suppressed or destroyed from within Belgian law enforcement and intelligence circles. Witnesses were not followed up on, files went missing, investigators who pursued certain leads found themselves quietly reassigned. A senior gendarmerie officer named Madani Bouhouche, who had documented links to far-right extremism and weapons trafficking, was identified as a person of interest, and then the investigation around him stalled in ways that career investigators described as inexplicable given the evidence available. In 1990, the Belgian parliament launched its own commission of inquiry. It confirmed the existence of a Belgian Gladio network, called SDRA-8, or the Tricolor Network. It confirmed that elements within the Belgian security state had been engaged in unauthorized activities. It did not conclusively name the Brabant Killers, but the implication sat in the official record like a splinter. Someone in the Belgian establishment knew more than they were saying. In 2019, after decades of advocacy by survivors and victims' families, the Belgian statute of limitations for murder was abolished, meaning the Brabant case could never legally expire. This was not a routine legal change. It was passed specifically with this case in mind. The message from the Belgian parliament was explicit. This will never be closed. This will never be allowed to simply age into irrelevance. But knowing that the case will remain open is not the same as knowing who did it. The original investigators are old now, many of them dead. The witnesses who saw the giant and the killer are decades removed from what they saw. The weapons, if they still exist, are somewhere unknown. And whoever the men were who walked into ordinary Belgian supermarkets and shot ordinary Belgian people, for reasons that remain formally unproven, they have lived and perhaps died without consequence. 28 people, 16 attacks, 3 years. A little girl named Nathalie, who was 3 years old and died in a supermarket on a Friday evening because a group of men with military training and a mysterious purpose decided that the ordinary Friday grocery run was the right backdrop for their message, whatever that message was. The graffiti doesn't keep appearing on Belgian walls the way it does on the Witchbury obelisk in England. The Belgians don't memorialize it that way. What they do instead is quieter and in some ways more unsettling. They simply don't forget. The survivors don't forget. The parliament, which keeps the case technically active and fully funded, doesn't forget. The investigators who have spent their entire careers on it and retired still give interviews, still push, still name names they cannot prove. And somewhere in an old house in Brabant, or somewhere far from it by now, someone who was there knows exactly what it was all about. They have known for 40 years, and they have never said a word.